This is a story from my own life, and it's the honest truth. It took me a long time to be able to tell it without my hands shaking, not from age, but from the memory of the cold, clean rage that focused my mind one last time. The weight of the rocking chair felt like a tombstone in my hands. It was made of burled walnut, impossibly smooth, a testament to the skills I'd spent 50 years perfecting. But on the polished brass plaque screwed into the backrest, the inscription wasn't a tribute, it was an eviction notice. My partners, Marcus Thorne and Leo Vance, stood on either side of me, their hands on my shoulders, their smiles as wide and false as a $3 bill. We were standing on a small stage in the center of our King Street showroom in Charleston, the heart of the company I had built from sawdust and dreams. They had gathered our employees, our biggest clients, even a reporter from the Post and Courier, all under the pretense of celebrating the 25th anniversary of Pendleton and Sons fine woodworking. But the only thing being celebrated was my execution. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The evening had started with champagne and hollow praise. Marcus, with his silvered hair and tailored Italian suit, was the face of the company. He worked the room like a master, his voice a smooth baritone that could sell a termite-ridden beam as a rustic masterpiece. He was the one who brought in the money, the one who charmed the wealthy retirees and the hotel magnates. He called me his mentor, his rock, the soul of the company. I stood by the display of a hand-carved spiral library staircase, my own design from a decade ago, and nodded, accepting the accolades. At 74, you get used to being treated like a monument, respected, admired, and generally expected to stay put. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 3 years, and the workshop was the only place my heart still knew how to beat. The scent of cedar and varnish was the only air I wanted to breathe. The company wasn't just my legacy, it was my last reason to get up in the morning. Leo, young, brilliant, and nervous, hovered near the back. I'd found him a dozen years prior, a kid fresh out of design school with a fire in his eyes and a preternatural gift for computer-aided design. I taught him the soul of the wood, how it breathes, how it thinks, how to read its grain like a story. He taught me how to translate my pencil sketches into flawless digital blueprints for the CNC machines. I loved him like the son I never had. I saw the future of my life's work in his hands. Then Marcus had tapped the microphone. "Friends, colleagues, family," he began, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged showroom. "We are here to celebrate a milestone. 25 years of unparalleled craftsmanship. And that is thanks to one man." He gestured to me, and a warm, genuine wave of applause filled the room. I felt a lump form in my throat. Maybe I had been too cynical. Maybe this was real. He beckoned me to the stage, and Leo joined us, his eyes fixed on his own expensive shoes. "Arthur Pendleton is more than a founder," Marcus continued, his hand now heavy on my shoulder. "He is an institution. And institutions deserve to be preserved, to be honored. He has given his life to this company. And now, it's our turn to give something back." That's when 2 employees brought out the rocking chair. It was a beautiful piece, I had to admit. A replica of a design I'd made for Eleanor when we were first married. The gesture felt so personal, so deeply thoughtful, that it almost brought me to tears. They placed it center stage. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a somber, respectful tone. "We, the company you built, want you to enjoy the fruits of your labor. To have the peaceful, well-deserved rest you've earned. We present this to you as a token of our deepest gratitude on the occasion of your retirement." The word hit me like a physical blow. Retirement. I hadn't said a word about retiring. The thought had never crossed my mind. My hands were steady, my eyes were sharp. I had 3 new designs in my notebook I was excited to start prototyping. I looked at Marcus, my confusion turning to a cold dread. His smile was no longer charming, it was predatory. I turned to Leo. He finally looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw it all, guilt, shame, and the pathetic weakness of a follower. He knew. He had let this happen. "Marcus, what is this?" I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. The microphone picked it up. The room fell silent. Marcus's smile tightened. "It's your victory lap, old friend," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've handled everything. We're exercising the succession clause in the partnership agreement. We're buying out your shares. You don't have to worry about another thing. You're free." He was saying I was fired. In front of everyone. He was taking my company, my name, my life, and handing me a chair to sit and die in. The reporter was scribbling furiously. The clients were whispering. My employees, the people I'd hired and trained, looked on with a mixture of pity and discomfort. The succession clause. I vaguely remembered it. Something about a partner being able to buy out another in the event of incapacitation or voluntary retirement. It was added 15 years ago when we incorporated. My lawyer at the time had been on vacation, and Marcus had pushed it through with his own guy, saying it was just a standard formality. I signed it, trusting him. Trusting the man who was now publicly gutting me. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Don't make a scene, Arthur," he hissed. "It's done. The papers are signed. It's a clean break. Take the win." I looked past him, at the name etched in gold leaf on the showroom's front window, Pendleton and Sons. My name. I looked at the rocking chair, a mockery of my love for my wife. And then I looked at Leo, the son I never had, who was now just another one of Marcus's tools. They hadn't just taken my company. They had tried to take my dignity. They had tried to erase me. I let them guide me off the stage, my mind a fog of shock and white-hot fury. A security guard I didn't recognize, Marcus must have hired him for the occasion, was waiting. He politely asked for my keys. I dropped them into his outstretched hand. The metallic clink was the sound of my life being locked away. As he escorted me to the door, I passed the spiral staircase, its perfect curves a testament to a lifetime of dedication. I had built that. I had built all of this. And as the cold Charleston night air hit my face, a single, clear thought cut through the chaos in my head. They may have gotten my signature on a piece of paper. But they had forgotten one thing. I had built the house. And I knew where every single joist, every wire, and every secret was buried. The war had just begun. The first week was a blur of silence and stale coffee. My small house in the Wagoner Terrace neighborhood, once a peaceful refuge, felt like a prison. The rocking chair sat in the corner of my living room, shrouded in a dusty sheet, an upholstered ghost I couldn't bear to look at. My lawyer, a good man named Bill, confirmed my worst fears. The clause was ironclad. Marcus had triggered it by having 2 company-appointed physicians declare me at risk for age-related cognitive decline, a lie so blatant it was insulting. They had manufactured a paper trail of my supposed forgetfulness 4 months, Leo creating duplicate project files to make it seem like I'd lost originals, Marcus documenting conversations where he claimed I'd forgotten key details. The buyout price was based on a 10-year-old valuation, a fraction of what the company was actually worth. I was legally checkmated, left with just enough money to live out my remaining years in quiet obscurity. That, I think, is what they imagined for me. A sad old man, fading away, telling stories of his glory days to anyone who would listen. They had fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I wasn't just a craftsman. I was a problem solver. Building a complex piece of furniture is about foreseeing stress points, understanding hidden tensions, and knowing how one component's failure can lead to the collapse of the entire structure. I had simply been handed a new, more personal project. My anger began to cool, crystallizing into something harder and more useful, resolve. I started not with their betrayal, but with my own foolishness. Why had I trusted them so completely? I started pulling out my old files from the attic. Unlike the digital chaos Leo managed, my records were tangible. Moleskine notebooks filled with sketches, leather-bound ledgers with project notes, and manila folders stuffed with invoices and supplier manifests, all written in my own precise hand. I spent my days at the dining room table, surrounded by paper, rebuilding the history of my own company. I wasn't looking for a loophole. I was looking for a weapon. For 2 weeks, I found nothing but memories. Then, late one night, fueled by black tea and a growing sense of frustration, I found it. It was a folder for a project from 4 years ago, the Blackwood Library. The client was a reclusive tech billionaire from out of state, a man who valued privacy and provenance above all else. The commission was a masterpiece, a 2-story library built entirely from site-certified Brazilian rosewood. The wood alone cost a fortune, nearly $500,000. The client insisted on a clear chain of custody for every single board, proof that it was legally and ethically sourced pre-ban timber. I had handled the design and construction, Marcus had handled the sourcing and financials. I remembered the wood arriving. I remembered the certificates, thick parchment with official-looking seals. I had been so caught up in the beauty of the material that I'd only given them a cursory glance. Marcus had handled the paperwork. Now, looking at my copy of the invoice from the supplier, a company called Amazonian Exports, a flicker of memory ignited. I remembered Marcus being unusually tense during that period. He'd taken the delivery himself at an off-site warehouse, claiming the main workshop wasn't secure enough. He'd said the supplier was a new contact, a specialist he'd vetted personally. I pulled out my old supplier ledger. I had a list of every reputable timber source I'd worked with over 30 years. Amazonian Exports wasn't on it. I turned to my laptop, my fingers feeling clumsy on the keyboard. A simple search for Amazonian Exports turned up nothing. No website, no address, no trace. A shell corporation. My blood ran cold. The next logical step was to check our own financials. But I was locked out of the company's servers. That's where Leo came in. He was the architect of their digital fortress. But Leo, for all his genius, had one flaw I'd always noted: he was intellectually lazy. He created brilliant systems, but he rarely bothered to clean up after himself. I powered up an old external hard drive I used for personal backups. Years ago, I'd had Leo set up an automatic sync from my work computer to this drive. It was a simple redundancy, a way for me to review plans from home. He had set it up and then forgotten about it. The syncing had probably stopped the day he locked me out, but that didn't matter. What mattered was what was already there. I spent the next 3 days digging through a mirror image of my old hard drive. It was a digital ghost of my life at the company. Tucked away in a forgotten temporary folder, inside a compressed .zip file mislabeled personal tax docs, I found it. It was a partial server backup from 4 years ago, a snapshot Leo must have created while troubleshooting some network issue. And inside it was the real invoice. The wood for the Blackwood Library hadn't come from a legitimate, site-certified source. It had been purchased for 1/10 of the price from a timber liquidator in Savannah known for dealing in questionable stock. It was likely illegally logged wood, laundered through a cheap domestic supplier. Marcus hadn't just overcharged a client. He had committed a federal crime, a violation of the Lacey Act, which makes it a felony to traffic in illegally sourced timber. He had forged the certificates, created a fake supplier, and pocketed nearly $400,000 in pure, untaxed profit. And Leo had to have known. His signature was on the digital inventory logs, inputting the fraudulent wood under the legitimate supplier's name. He was an accomplice. This was it. This was the stress point. This wasn't a partnership dispute anymore. This was a felony. My grief for the company I'd lost was finally burned away by the heat of my rage. I looked over at the shrouded rocking chair. They had given me a seat to watch the world go by. Instead, I was going to use it as a front-row seat to their immolation. The first step was simple. I needed to get back inside my workshop. Getting back into the fortress I built was easier than I expected. Marcus and Leo saw a building. I saw a living organism whose anatomy I knew by heart. They had upgraded the security, installing keycard readers and new cameras. But they only secured the obvious entrances. They had forgotten about the old dumbwaiter shaft in the finishing room. It was installed in the 1950s when the building was a textile mill, a relic we'd walled off but never removed because it was too much trouble. The access panel was in a little used chemical storage closet, hidden behind a rack of flammable solvents. The night watchman was a man named George, a quiet Vietnam vet I'd hired 15 years ago. I knew his wife had passed last spring, and that he was lonely. I started visiting him, parking my old Ford pickup down the street and walking over around 2 a.m., long after Marcus and Leo were home dreaming of their stolen fortunes. I'd bring a thermos of coffee and a bag of donuts from the 24-hour bakery. We'd sit on the loading dock and talk about our wives, about the war, about the way the city was changing. I never once mentioned Marcus or Leo. I just became a fixture of his lonely nights. After a couple of weeks, he stopped questioning my presence. He'd let me in the side door to use the restroom, then go back to his rounds, leaving me alone for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. That was all I needed. The first time I opened that panel in the solvent closet, the smell of dust and decay filled my nostrils. The shaft was dark and tight, but the old pulley system was still intact. I was 74, but I'd spent my life hauling lumber. I was stronger than I looked. I'd wear old, dark clothes, and with a small headlamp and a bag of tools, I'd hoist myself up one floor to the main workshop. I was a ghost in my own machine. The place had changed. It felt colder, more sterile. The warm, chaotic hum of creation had been replaced by a quiet, efficient chill. Leo had implemented a new inventory system with barcodes and scanners. My old handwritten job tickets were gone. But the bones of the place were the same. The scent of my specific Danish oil blend still lingered in the air. Over the next few weeks, I became a nocturnal creature, learning their new rhythms. I studied the project boards, read the new schematics. That's how I found out about the Beaumont Grand. It was the biggest contract in the company's history. A new chain of ultra-luxury hotels, and Thorne and Vance Designs, as they now called themselves, had won the bid to furnish the first 5 flagship locations, starting with the one right here in Charleston. It was a multi-million-dollar deal that would make them legends. And as I dug deeper into the project specs on Leo's unsecured desktop, he never bothered to lock it, the arrogance of youth. I saw Marcus's pattern repeating itself, but on a terrifyingly grand scale. The contract specified solid Honduran mahogany for all the case goods, wardrobes, desks, minibars. It was a premium, expensive choice. But the purchase orders Leo had filed were for something else, lower-grade African mahogany, sourced from a different, cheaper supplier. He was doing it again, but this time he wasn't just pocketing hundreds of thousands, he was saving millions. And he was gambling that no one, not the designers, not the hotel executives, would know the difference. But I would. And more importantly, I knew the wood's fatal flaw. African mahogany is a fine wood, but it's notoriously unstable if not cured perfectly. It has to be kiln-dried in a slow, meticulous process. Rushing it leaves microscopic pockets of moisture trapped deep in the grain. To the naked eye, it looks perfect. But over time, as it's exposed to changes in humidity and temperature, it will warp. It will twist and crack and tear itself apart. And Charleston, with its thick, soupy, subtropical air, was the perfect incubator. Marcus, in his greed, was cutting a corner that would eventually destroy everything. He was building their triumph on a foundation of lies and bad timber. My revenge, which had started as a vague desire for justice, now had a blueprint. I wasn't just going to expose them. That was too simple, too clean. I was an artist of construction. I would now become an artist of deconstruction. I would let them build their entire monument, let them climb to the very top, and then I would personally, silently, and invisibly pull the cornerstone out from the foundation. The plan began to form in my mind, each step as precise as a dovetail joint. They were making hundreds of identical pieces for the hotel rooms. Night after night, I would slip into the workshop and perform my own quiet work. I didn't need a sledgehammer. My tools were a simple moisture meter, a hypodermic syringe, and a deep understanding of my craft. I started with the finished pieces waiting for delivery. Under the cover of darkness, I'd find the almost invisible joinery seams in the large panels of the wardrobes and minibars. With a syringe filled with a carefully calibrated saline solution, I injected a small amount of salt water deep into the wood's end grain. Salt attracts moisture from the air. In the humid environment of a Charleston hotel, it would act as a catalyst, accelerating the wood's self-destruction. The process would be slow, starting with a slight warp, a sticking door. Then, a few months later, a visible crack. Then, catastrophic failure. For other pieces, like the delicate legs of the writing desks, I used a different method. I brought in a small container of drywood termite eggs. Not the swarming, obvious kind, but a slow, patient species that could take months to establish a colony. I introduced them into the hidden mortise and tenon joints, a single point of entry that would be impossible to detect. They would eat the furniture from the inside out. I worked meticulously, leaving no trace. A drop of salt water here, a few eggs there. I was a virus, infecting their masterpiece one piece at a time. And while I conducted my silent campaign of sabotage, I also gathered my ammunition. I used a simple USB drive to copy everything from Leo's server, the real invoices for the African mahogany, the fake ones for the Honduran, the internal emails where he and Marcus discussed the cost-saving measures. I even found the folder for the old Blackwood Library job, with all the evidence of their first sin untouched. They were so arrogant they didn't even bother to cover their tracks. They had cast me out, believing I was a relic of the past. But the past was coming for them, and it was patient, thorough, and it knew exactly where to cut. As the weeks turned into months, my life settled into a strange duality. By day, I was Arthur Pendleton, a forgotten old man. I'd take walks through Hampton Park, read the paper at a coffee shop, and exchange pleasantries with neighbors who looked at me with a sort of gentle pity. They knew my story, or at least the version Marcus had so carefully crafted, the brilliant old artisan who had gracefully stepped aside. I played the part. I let my shoulders stoop a little. I walked a bit slower. An old man is invisible, and invisibility was my greatest asset. But by night, I was a saboteur, a ghost haunting the company I had created. My late-night trips to the workshop became a grim ritual. George, the security guard, now just waved me in, leaving the side door unlocked for me. Our late-night coffees on the loading dock were a comfort to us both, two lonely men finding solace in the quiet hours. Inside, the work continued. The scale of the Beaumont Grand project was staggering. The workshop, which had once been a place of bespoke, individual creation, was now an assembly line. The air no longer smelled of creativity, but of pure commerce. The soul was gone. It made my work easier. There was no love in these pieces, so I felt no remorse as I poisoned them, one by one. I became an expert in their production schedule. I knew which pieces were going to the flagship Charleston Hotel, and I focused my efforts there. I was a connoisseur of decay, tailoring my methods to each piece. For the headboards, which were large, veneered panels, I used a fine blade to make a tiny incision on the back and introduced a small amount of a specific mold spore. In the climate-controlled hotel rooms, it would do nothing. But the moment housekeeping opened a window to air out a room, the dose of Charleston humidity would activate it, causing the veneer to bubble and peel away from its substrate in ugly, discolored patches. My nightly work wasn't just about destruction. It was also about confirmation. I took core samples from the Honduran mahogany using a micro-drill bit, the kind jewelers use. I sealed them in small plastic bags, labeled with the date and the specific piece of furniture. At home, I set up a small lab in my basement. Using a microscope I'd had since my early days of studying wood grain, I confirmed what I already knew. The cellular structure was unmistakably that of Caia ivorensis, African mahogany. It was not the Swiatinium acrophylla, Honduran mahogany, that the contract, and the law, demanded. I had my physical proof. One night, while copying files from Leo's machine, I found something that made my stomach clench. It was a folder of his personal designs, things he was working on in his spare time. They were beautiful. They were innovative, elegant, full of the spark I had first seen in him. But they were also timid. He hadn't shown them to Marcus. He was still afraid. In that moment, I didn't feel rage towards him, but a profound sadness. He had traded his gift, his soul, for a seat at Marcus's table, and he didn't even realize the price was his own future. Marcus was using him, and when he was no longer useful, he would be discarded just as I had been. But my pity didn't last long. They were a unit, a partnership in crime, and they would fall together. The local news was buzzing with anticipation for the grand opening of the Beaumont Grand Charleston. It was being hailed as the crown jewel of the city's hospitality scene, a symbol of Charleston's blend of historic charm and modern luxury. And Thorne and Vance Designs was the star of the show. Marcus was everywhere, in the paper, on the local news, giving interviews about his vision of Southern elegance. He never missed an opportunity to mention how he was carrying on the legacy of quality from his old mentor, Arthur Pendleton. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. The grand opening gala was scheduled for the first Friday in May. I marked the date on my calendar. My work was almost done. All the furniture for the Charleston Hotel had been delivered and installed. My traps were set. My evidence was compiled. Now, I had to prepare the delivery. I wasn't going to the police. A criminal case could get bogged down in legal maneuvers for years. Marcus could afford lawyers who would paint me as a disgruntled, senile old man seeking revenge. No, my justice had to be swifter, more public, and more complete. It had to be a demolition. I chose my targets carefully. Target 1, Richard Beaumont, the CEO of the Beaumont Hotel Group. A ruthless but fair businessman with a reputation for demanding perfection. His personal address in Atlanta was easy enough to find. Target 2, Sarah Jennings, the lead investigative reporter at the Post and Courier. She was young, ambitious, and had a nose for corporate malfeasance. She had written the original, glowing profile on Thorne and Vance. She would relish the chance to break the real story. Target 3, the Regional Enforcement Office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the agency responsible for prosecuting Lacey Act violations. Their interest would be purely legal and entirely unforgiving. For each of them, I prepared a package. Inside a simple FedEx box, I placed a black binder. The first page was a simple, typed letter with no signature. It read, "The enclosed documents detail a comprehensive fraud perpetrated by Thorne and Vance Designs against the Beaumont Grand. What was contracted as Honduran mahogany is, in fact, a cheaper, improperly cured substitute. The furniture in your new hotel will soon begin to fail. This is not a possibility, it is a certainty." The second part of this binder contains proof of a prior, similar act of fraud, which constitutes a federal crime. The rest of the binder was a masterclass in evidence. I included copies of the contracts, the fake invoices, and the real invoices. I printed out the incriminating emails between Marcus and Leo. I included a detailed scientific analysis of the wood samples, complete with magnified photos of the cellular structures, comparing the contracted wood with what was actually delivered. For the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I included a separate file detailing the Blackwood Library fraud, complete with maps of protected forests in Brazil. It was undeniable, irrefutable, and damning. I scheduled the FedEx pickups for the Thursday before the gala, with guaranteed overnight delivery for Friday morning. They would all receive their packages just hours before the party began. The timing was everything. I wanted the bomb to go off not before the party, but in the middle of it. I wanted Marcus and Leo to be standing at the apex of their triumph, surrounded by the city's elite, when the first cracks began to show. I pictured the scene, the CEO reading my letter in his Atlanta office, the reporter racing to the hotel, the federal agents quietly assembling. It was all set in motion. After I dropped the packages off, I went home. I walked into my living room and pulled the sheet off the rocking chair. For the first time, I didn't see it as an insult. I saw it as a piece of wood waiting to be perfected. I took it out to my small workshop in the back of my house, plugged in my sander, and began to strip away their varnish. The day of the gala, a strange calm settled over me. I had done the work. The machine I'd built was now running on its own. There was nothing left for me to do but watch. I put on a simple collared shirt and slacks, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on my porch. The air was thick and humid, the sky a hazy, expectant gray. It was perfect weather for my purposes. At around 11 a.m., I got my first sign. A colleague of mine, another old-timer in the furniture business, called me. "Arthur, you won't believe this," he said, his voice buzzing with gossip. "I just got a call from Sarah Jennings at the Post and Courier. She was asking all sorts of questions about timber sourcing, the Lacey Act, even asked what I knew about your retirement. Sounded like she was onto something big." I feigned ignorance, thanked him for the call, and hung up, a grim smile on my face. The first stone had been thrown. The ripples were spreading. My plan for the evening was simple. I had no intention of going anywhere near the hotel. My revenge was not about confrontation. It was about consequence. Instead, I drove to the Mount Pleasant Memorial Waterfront Park and found a bench with a clear view across the Cooper River. In the distance, the Charleston skyline was bathed in the soft light of dusk. The newly opened Beaumont Grand was an unmissable beacon of glass and steel, its lights glittering like a pile of stolen jewels. I had a pair of binoculars and a small portable radio tuned to a local news station. The gala started at 7. The radio was full of breathless updates from a reporter on the red carpet, describing the arrival of the mayor, the state senators, and the cream of Charleston society. Marcus and Leo arrived to a flurry of camera flashes. The reporter interviewed Marcus, who, in his typical fashion, was smooth and effusive. "Tonight is not just about a building," he purred into the microphone. "It's about a standard of excellence. It's about a commitment to timeless quality, a legacy we are proud to champion." The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. Around 8 o'clock, I imagined Richard Beaumont, the CEO, having finished reading my binder in his Atlanta office, was now on the phone with his legal team, his voice a low, controlled fury. I imagined Sarah Jennings, binder in hand, walking past the oblivious security and into the party, her reporter's instincts screaming. And I imagined two quiet, stern-faced agents from the Fish and Wildlife Service showing their badges to the hotel manager and asking for a private word with Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vance. From my vantage point across the river, I couldn't see the drama unfold inside, but I could feel it. The real show, however, the one I had personally designed, was just beginning. My sabotage was never meant to be explosive, it was meant to be insidious. It was designed to work with the environment. The hotel's powerful air conditioning system would have been drying the air all day. But now, with hundreds of guests breathing, talking, and drinking, the humidity inside the ballroom would be rising. The doors to the terrace would be open to the humid night air. This was the trigger. My saltwater injections would be weeping, drawing that moisture deep into the wood's fibers. The termite eggs would be warming. The mold spores would be waking up. The first report came not from the news, but from another text from my friend. "You are not going to believe this. My cousin is a waiter at the gala. He said the big mahogany bar in the ballroom just made a sound like a gunshot and a crack appeared right down the middle of it. They're trying to cover it with flowers." A slow, cold satisfaction washed over me. It was starting. The bar would have been one of the first pieces I treated. A massive, load-bearing slab of improperly cured wood, now twisting under its own weight. I raised my binoculars. I could see the lights on the grand terrace overlooking the harbor. I could see figures moving, but nothing more. Then, the radio reporter's tone changed. "We're getting some unconfirmed reports of a disturbance inside the main ballroom," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "It appears some structural issues are becoming apparent. We're seeing hotel staff discreetly moving around, examining furniture. It's a very strange scene. I didn't need to see it. I could picture it perfectly. A guest leaning back in a chair and hearing the telltale creak of a failing joint. A woman setting her drink down on a side table and noticing the veneer was bubbling. The doors to a grand wardrobe in a display suite, beautifully bookmatched, now warped just enough that they refused to close. These weren't dramatic collapses. They were small, undeniable betrayals of quality. In a place like the Beaumont Grand, where perfection was the only standard, it was a death by 1,000 cuts. The final act began around 9:30. The radio reporter came back on, her voice barely a whisper. "Folks, I have never seen anything like this. 2 federal agents have just escorted Marcus Thorne and Leo Vance out of the ballroom. They are not in handcuffs, but they are being very firmly led into a private room. At the same time, the hotel CEO, who apparently just arrived from the airport, is in a heated discussion with his staff. The party is effectively over. Guests are confused, whispering, 'It's chaos.' I lowered my binoculars. I looked at the glittering hotel, a monument to greed, now rotting from the inside out. They hadn't been arrested yet, but they would be. The Lacey Act charges would stick, the evidence was too strong. The Beaumont Group would sue them into oblivion for fraud and breach of contract. Their company, their reputations, and their futures were utterly destroyed in the space of a single evening. Their downfall was as total and as carefully constructed as one of my own cabinets. I didn't feel joy or elation. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of balance restored. I stayed on the bench for another hour, watching the lights of the hotel flicker as guests departed and official-looking vehicles began to arrive. The cool night air felt clean. I had taken back my story. I drove home, the streets of Charleston quiet now. Back in my workshop, the walnut rocking chair sat on my bench, its old varnish completely stripped away. It was bare, honest wood now. I picked up a piece of fine-grit sandpaper and began the slow, rhythmic process of smoothing the grain, my hands working with a skill and a certainty that no one could ever take from me. The aftermath was a quiet storm. The story broke the next morning, a front-page exposé in the Post and Courier by Sarah Jennings. Her article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, laying out the entire sordid affair in meticulous detail. She told the story of the Beaumont grand fraud, the corner-cutting with the African mahogany, and the catastrophic, humiliating failure at the gala. But she didn't stop there. She had dug deeper, using the information I provided as a starting point. She'd found another one of Marcus's victims, a young designer from a decade ago who'd been cheated and forced out in a similar, smaller-scale scheme. And she had the full story of the Blackwood Library, confirmed by anonymous sources within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The article painted a portrait of Marcus Thorne not as a captain of industry, but as a parasitic predator who built his career by devouring the talent and trust of others. Leo Vance was portrayed as his weak-willed, tragic accomplice. My name, Arthur Pendleton, was mentioned with a reverence that bordered on mythic, the old master, the heart of the company, cast aside just before his life's work was driven into the ground. My forced retirement was no longer a sad footnote, it was the story's inciting incident, the act of hubris that led to their spectacular fall. The city was scandalized. The tight-knit world of Charleston society, which had lionized Marcus, turned on him with breathtaking speed. His memberships were revoked, his name was scrubbed from charity boards, and friends who had toasted his success a week earlier now crossed the street to avoid him. Thorne and Vance designs collapsed almost overnight. The Beaumont Group's lawsuit was biblical in scope, seeking damages not just for the cost of the furniture but for the reputational harm to their brand-new, $500 million hotel. Within a month, the company was forced into bankruptcy, its assets liquidated to pay a fraction of its debts. The workshop, my workshop, was shuttered, the doors chained and a foreclosure notice slapped on the window. Marcus and Leo were indicted on federal charges for Lacey Act violations. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, Leo cracked. He took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Marcus in exchange for a lighter sentence. His betrayal of Marcus was the final, pathetic echo of his betrayal of me. I watched it all from a distance. No one ever connected me to the anonymous tip. I remained the invisible old man, the dignified victim. A few old employees called to offer their condolences, which I accepted with quiet grace. Bill, my lawyer, called me, his voice a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Arthur," he said, "this is the most complete, surgical corporate takedown I have ever seen. It's like someone knew exactly where all the bodies were buried." I just grunted and said, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth." He laughed, but I think he knew. I didn't attend any of the court proceedings. I read about them in the paper. Marcus, stripped of his charm and expensive suits, looked haggard and defeated. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and a fine that ensured he would never have a dime to his name again. Leo got 18 months, his career in ashes, his talent forever tainted by his weakness. It was a complete and total victory. The company was gone, my name sullied and then cleared, my enemies brought to ruin. But there was no triumph in it, no sweet taste of victory. It was just quiet. The rage that had fueled me for months had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. It was the silence of a workshop after the last tool has been put away. My days found a new rhythm, one that wasn't dictated by vengeance or grief. I finished the rocking chair. I worked on it for weeks, taking my time, letting the process heal me. I resanded every curve, recut a joint that wasn't quite perfect, and applied coat after coat of hand-rubbed oil finish until the walnut glowed with a deep, inner light. It was no longer their parting shot. It was my final statement. A testament to the fact that true quality, true craftsmanship, cannot be faked or stolen. It has to be earned. It has to come from the hands. I sold my house in Wagoner Terrace. It was too big for me, too full of ghosts. I bought a small cottage down in the Lowcountry, with a little garage I converted into a one-man workshop. I don't take commissions anymore. I build for myself. Small, perfect things, a jewelry box for a neighbor's granddaughter, a reading stand for the local library, a simple set of wooden toys for a children's charity. My hands, which had once designed grand staircases for billionaires, were now content with simpler work. The scale of the project doesn't determine its worth. It's the honesty of the effort. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my porch in that walnut rocking chair, looking out at the marshlands under a canopy of stars. The motion is smooth, steady, and balanced, a quiet pendulum marking the passage of time. My life's work, the company that bore my name, is gone. But the work itself, the knowledge in my head and the skill in my fingers, remains. They thought the value was in the name on the door, but they forgot the work is done by the hands. The end.